Hi, it's Michelle Birdsong. Think like a monk. The heaven, pleasure, and kingdom, like Eve, a mother in kingdom. By Jay Shetty. Jesus, A-I, she, E-T, tie. Okay, it's tied to an E-T, Eve. Okay, let's begin. This is the other book, The Battle for God, A History of Fundamentalism. Let's see where we begin. I think I'll begin here. Yeah. The sixth Shah Imam Am Jafar as Sadiq Dead 765 realized this and formally abandoned armed struggle. He declared that even though he, as the Prophet's descendant, was the only legitimate leader, Imam, of the Ummah, his true function was not to engage in a fruitless conflict, but to guide the Shiite in the mystical interpretation of Scripture. Each Imam of Ali's line was, he taught, the spiritual leader of his generation. Each one of the Imams had been designated by his predecessor, who had transmitted to him a secret knowledge, ilm, of divine truth. An Imam was therefore an infallible spiritual director and a perfect judge. The Shiite thus abjured politics and became a mystical sect, cultivating the techniques of meditation in order to intuit a secret. Satmat, Batin, or be at pleasure in, a secret wisdom that lay behind every single word of the Quran. The Shiites were not content with the literal meaning of Scripture, but used the text as a basis for new insights. The symbolism of the divinely inspired Am reflected the Shiites' sense of a sacred presence. Which a mystic experienced as immanent and accessible in a turbulent, dangerous world. It was not a doctrine for the masses, who might interpret it crudely, so Shiites must keep their spiritual as well as their political views to themselves. The mythology of the Imamate, as developed by Jafar as Sadiq, was an imaginative vision that looked beyond the literal and factual meaning of Scripture and history to the constant primordial reality of the unseen. Where the uninitiated could see only a man, the contemplative Shiite could discern a trace of the divine in Jafar as Sadiq. The Imamate also symbolized the extreme difficulty of incarnating God's will in the flawed and tragic conditions of daily life. Jafar as Sadiq effectively separated religion from politics, privatizing faith and confining it to the personal realm. He did this to protect religion and enable it to survive in a world that seemed essentially hostile to it. The secularization policy sprang from a profoundly spiritual impulse. Shias knew that it could be dangerous to mix religion and politics. A century later, this became tragically evident. In 836, the Abbasid Caliphates moved their capital to Samarra, some 60 miles south of Baghdad. By this date, Abbasid power was disintegrating, and though the Caliphate remained the nominal ruler of the whole Muslim world, real authority lay with the local emirs and chieftains throughout the far-flung empire. The Caliphates felt that in these disturbed times they could not permit the imams, the descendants of the Prophet, to remain at large, and in 848, Caliph al-Mutawakki summoned the 10th Imam, Ali al-Hadi, from Medina to Samarra, where he was placed under house arrest. He and his son, the 11th Imam, Hassan al-Askari, could only maintain contact with the Shia by means of an agent, Wakil, who lived in al-Kark, the mercantile court of Baghdad, practicing a trade to deflect the attention of the Abbasid authorities. In 874, the 11th Imam died, probably poisoned at the behest of the Caliphate. He had been kept in such strict seclusion that Shiites knew very limited about him. Did he have a son? If not, what would happen to the succession? Had the line died out? And if so, did this mean that the Shia was deprived of mystical guidance? Speculation ran rife, but the most popular theory insisted that Hassan al-Askari indeed had a son, Abu al-Qasim Muhammad, the 12th Imam, who had gone into hiding to save his life. It was an attractive solution because it suggested that nothing had changed. The last two Imams had been virtually inaccessible. Now the hidden Imam would continue to make contact with the people through his wakil, Uthman al-Amr, who would dispense spiritual advice, collect the Jagat aims. Now the hidden Imam would continue to dispense spiritual advice, collect the zakat, alms, interpret the scripture as time passed beyond, and delivered legal judgments. But this solution had a limited lifespan. As time passed beyond the point where the 12th Imam seemed likely to be still alive, Shias became anxious once again until in 934, the current agent, Ali ibn Muhammad as Samarri, brought the Shia a message from the hidden Imam. He had not died, but had been miraculously concealed by God. He would return one day shortly before the last judgment to inaugurate a reign of justice. He was still the infallible guide of the Shias and the only legitimate ruler of the Ummas, but he would no longer be able to commune with the faithful through agents or have any direct contact with them. Shias should not expect his speedy return. They would only see him again after a long time had passed and the earth had become filled with tyranny. The myth of the occultation of the hidden Imam cannot be explained rationally. It makes sense only in a context of mysticism and ritual practice. If we understand the story as a logos, one that should be interpreted literally as a plain statement of fact, all kinds of questions arise. Where in the world had the Imam gone? Was he on earth or in some sort of intellectual realm? What kind of life could he possibly have? Was he getting older and older? How could he guide the faithful if they could neither see nor hear him? These questions would seem obtuse to a Shi'i who was involved in a disciplined cultivation of the batin, or secret sense of scripture, which bypassed reason and drew on the more intuitive powers of the mind. Shi'is did not interpret their scriptures and doctrines literally. Their entire spirituality was now a symbolic quest for the unseen. Al-Ghabi, that lies beneath the flux of outward Zahir events. Shai is worshipped an invisible, inscrutable God. Search for a concealed meaning in the Quran. Took part in a ceaseless but invisible battle for justice, yearned for a hidden iman, and cultivated an esoteric version of Islam that had to be secreted from the world. This intense contemplative life was the setting that alone made sense of the occultation. The hidden imam had become a myth. By his removal from normal history, he had been liberated from the confines of space. And time. And paradoxically, he became a more vivid presence in the lives of Shias than when he and the other imams had lived a normal life in Medina or Samarra. The occultation is a myth that expresses our sense of the sacred as elusive and tantalizingly absent. It is present in the world but not of it. Divine wisdom is inseparable from humanity, for we can only perceive anything, God included, from a human perspective, but takes us beyond the insight of ordinary men and women. Like any myth, the occultation could not be understood by discursive reason, as though it were a fact that was either self-evident or capable of logical demonstration. But it did express a truth in the religious experience of humanity. Like any esoteric spirituality, Shiism at this stage was only for an elite. It tended to attract the more intellectually adventuresome Muslims who had a talent and a need for mystical contemplation. But Shias also had a different political outlook from other Muslims, where the rituals and discipline of Sunni spirituality helped Sunni Muslims to accept life as it was and to conform to archetypical norms. Shi'i mysticism expressed a divine discontent. The early traditions that developed shortly after the announcement of the doctrine of the occultation reveal the frustration and impotence felt by many Shias during the 10th century. This has been called the Shi'i century because many of the local commanders in the Islamic Empire who wielded effective power in a given region had Shi'i sympathies, but this turned out to make no appreciable difference. For the majority, life was still unjust and inequitable despite the clear teachings of the Quran. Indeed, the imams had all been victims of rulers who Shi'is regarded as corrupt and illegitimate tradition and illegitimate. Tradition had it that every single one of the imams, after Hussein had been poisoned by the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, in their longing for a more just and benevolent social order, Shias developed an ecclesiology centering on the final appearance, Zuhur, of the hidden Imam, during the last days when he would return, battle with the forces of evil, and establish a golden age of justice and peace before the final judgment. But this yearning for the end did not mean that